Okay. Alright, let me get pretty, bro. Okay. So I'm out in the woods right now, and I just want to chat about something that I'm going to be releasing a much more fleshed out video on very, very soon. So, okay, what do I want to talk about right now? So I'm wanting to discuss how the esoteric studies are a cure for the type of person who has been an atheist for a long time, or has been maybe bitten by a religion that they were raised in the past and wants something fresh and new. Sorry, there's people like dirt biking and shit. It's fine, whatever, they don't give a fuck. But basically, that's kind of sick. But basically, I'll tell a little bit of my personal story, and then I'm gonna be doing this again more in a fleshed out video pretty soon, where I'm gonna be talking about how the Western existentialists, both Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, had solved a part of the problem, but that they, I think, couldn't foresee where our world was going to go. And so I talk about how esotericism is kind of a final piece to merge Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. But what I want to discuss is my kind of backstory. So I was raised religiously, and I was a very existential little kid. My parents said that I questioned the belief in God from like literally as young as age 3. Like they would be praying, and I would say, how do we know that God exists? Right? They would take me to church, and I was kind of a troublemaker. Like the church teachers didn't like to teach me because whenever I'd be in the kind of classes, I would always kind of like debate, even at age like 6 or whatever, like super young. And I'm not saying this to kind of be like, oh, look at me, I was such a free thinker at a young age. It was more that I was plagued actually with existential issues from a very young age. I had kind of mental health issues as young as those ages. I had not the trauma dump, right, but I had kind of, a lot of dark thoughts as like a very young kid. And when I had found out about death, at around age 3, it really was something that I struggled with a lot, all the way through my early adulthood. This has always come back. What's the point of everything if we pass? So anyways, I'd become an atheist around age probably 10. And, so I'm in my mid-20s now. So this is kind of, you can imagine the era. This is kind of when like atheism on the internet was a bit on the rise, and, you could feel so smart being an atheist. So, during high school, I probably became a bit more of kind of a pantheist, Buddhist adjacent type. I didn't know what pantheism was, and if you don't, it is essentially the belief that if there's any sort of divine order, it is within the confines of this kind of universe. Now I'm more of what's called a panentheist, meaning this universe is more a part of the kind of divine order. It is attached to it. It is not separate. So it's kind of still not dualistic. I more so view it as it is a lesser realm or emanation from what is above and beyond us. So anyways, and I believe it's necessary. So I don't think that it is this punishment or anything along those lines. So, okay, continuing on. So I found a book through a very close friend of mine when I was around 23 years old. And he had kind of given me a copy, a very close friend of mine, and it was Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, which I highly recommend this book to anybody who is, dude, the bees always go crazy out here. I recommend this book to anybody who wants to is new to this stuff and wants to just be exposed to a lot of different perspectives in a fun way. Manly P. Hall is a person who I'm lucky enough to have kind of like been around people who have met him in his life. I've been to the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, which was set up by him. And I think it's really cool what he's done, and I think that he left an awesome legacy. He's kind of a role model in some ways for me. So, okay, so continuing on though, I highly recommend that book if you're starting out. But that book was introduced to me. And it kind of just began a curiosity. It made me go, oh, wait, there are alternative views that still utilize kind of some of the potential underlying truths of, or at least at the minimum, allegories of previous kind of historical faiths. So I had always been into philosophy because I dealt with existential kind of dread for a long time in my life. So I had learned about Soren Kierkegaard, right? And his idea of the leap of faith. And I was like, I can't take that kind of like, I mean, I guess Kierkegaard was against things like the Nicene Creed, but I couldn't take that kind of like leap of faith to believe that, you know, Christ had died on the cross for sin specifically, and that was the redeeming moment. I couldn't necessarily believe purely in the virgin birth, and I didn't really see a reason to. I thought that it could be pure even if it was not a virgin birth. And I also wasn't fully sure what I believed in terms of like the God-man of Christ, you know. I had more questions. I was like, could this have been a kind of a human who had played a divine role, like their soul and incarnation was utilized to set up the new aeon, or what, you know? And I still I don't know, and I don't think so I couldn't take that leap of faith. But I was having a heavy just kind of like depressive time, you know. I was having a rough time. And I remember the moment, I was walking around in this like gated community with a friend on a golf course at night. Like I didn't live there, but I had the gate code, and we were just walking around. And I told him, I was like, dude, I'm tired of like worrying that life has no meaning and stuff. I'm gonna choose to believe in something beyond this realm, something metaphysical. I was like, this is going to be my answer for now, right? And then I continued on, and I began to get more involved socially in spaces of esoteric study. I met people who are initiates of various groups, and it kind of opened my eyes and removed the fear of it, right? There's so much fear, especially when you're interested in kind of like conspiracy type topics. There's so much fear around these groups being like satanic or whatever, stuff like that, right? But as I got to know more people who were interested in the esoteric studies, in many different groups, by the way, you know, I'm pretty involved in that world nowadays. As I got to know more people, I realized that they're all just people, right? But that they're willing to discuss and really seek kind of like, you know, ultimate truth. It might be a little windy, my bad. And so I kind of just realized, I'm like, there's other people who are in this effort, right? And this is kind of their, not cure, but their treatment for existential issues, you know? And I'm trying to lean in whenever it's windy. And so I started, you know, this opened up the floodgates for me, where I was like, I became, you know, what's called a perennialist, where I believe that there's a perennial undercurrent of truth that can be discovered through most of the faiths, and that they're at the minimum trying to point towards it. I started to look at things more allegorically. In fact, one thing that I can, I'll just bring up as an example is like Adam and Eve, right? The Garden of Eden story. If you look at it, literally, right? It immediately presents the problem of evil. It immediately presents issues around God's morality, right? If God is truly all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, and created Adam and Eve with the knowledge of what they would do, then it must have been for the greater good, their quote-unquote punishment, or whatever, right? There's these issues. But something that I, you know, told actually a like pretty standard type of kind of like Protestant Christian recently is, I'm like, you know, so many people treat what Eve did as this like cardinal flaw. And look at the verses. So it's like, you guys can eat of the tree of life and the other plants in the garden, but you cannot eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for surely you will die. So like, was this God, okay, a conscious God, casting this like righteous judgment upon them for the action? Or is this a little bit more of an allegory? Like, they hopped into dualism, right? It's they got like, we can actually, let's get a little Nietzschean about this, right? He wrote the book Beyond Good and Evil, okay? He talked about getting beyond those paradigms and in a way that can be life affirming, you know, kind of creating our own moral structures, etc. Could there be something to that, that if we attempt to systematize good and evil and really like attempt to know divine morals, that we are actually stepping away from it? Are we actually stepping away? Like, these are the mysteries, right? But at the minimum, we can look at the Adam and Eve story and say, well, what they did caused, yes, it caused imperfection, but it also caused the spawning of mankind. Is that bad, or is that a beautiful thing? Like, are you glad that you were born? Maybe not. But if you are, you know, or at least if you're willing to struggle with it, it's like there's beauty in that, right? There's beauty in accepting flaw and creating the flawed world, right? So that's just one example, right? Of like, if you look at things a little bit more flexibly, that could totally transform your perception of that story, right? It no longer is the judging God, you know, creating them with knowledge of what they would do and then causing punishment, you know. So there's a lot of routes you can go with this, right? And that's just one esoteric interpretation of like kind of, you know, Abrahamic theology. But there's so much more, right? So why do I think that this can be a treatment for kind of the modern neuroses of our time? So Carl Jung, there's a quote by him, I don't have it exact, but I might. He says that like the biggest cure that he had found for neuroses was to believe in something beyond, or believe in something divine. Like, I don't remember the exact quote, as I said, but you can look it up, and it's a good quote. And he actually witnessed this, that like his patients, who he was able to kind of convince them of some sort of realm beyond this, or some sort of divine purpose to everything, it really did cure / treat them. And I actually experienced that as someone who was like had kind of prior diagnoses and stuff like that, and some pretty like solid issues in that arena. It really like helped me to calm down, just being like, you know, there is something beyond us, and we're never going to fully know. It's mysterious, but let's try to look at things from a perspective that can maintain some sort of belief in the beyond. So this is why I'm very non-judgmental of people's spiritual religious views. I understand people's need to find meaning for themselves. I mean, something that I am somewhat kind of against is, I mean, of course, you know, the history of like, I'm someone into the esoteric studies, and I'm friends with a lot of people who are, and there was a time where, and I mean, even, you know, currently, where like you would get burned for this, right? There was extremely educated people within the confines of the church back in, you know, the 1500s. I believe John Dee was 1400s. Dante, Milton, these people were all Rosicrucian, and they had alternative perspectives. A lot of where this standpoint is that people who are into these types of studies are satanic or whatever, actually is conditioning from the Catholic Church. They had to kind of create that narrative because the Templars were getting experimental with their theology. The most highly educated people within that realm essentially were the type of people who were going to have heretical views, right? To be educated, you basically had to go through the church. You had to go to the priests, all that. The only people who could learn to read were very much so embodied in the church. And, you know, that was not a bad thing. I'm not saying I'm against that. But definitely the people who got more curious or connected were able to have alternative perspectives. There were various times where there was the Hermetic revival and people kind of merging Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Christianity. Just all these different things that popped up, but you would get, you know, killed for this. There's a John Dee letter, I believe, to a friend. If I'm wrong on any of this, you know, correct me, or just know that I'm wrong. But I believe he wrote to a friend, and he had discovered his concept of the quaternary, which was kind of this trinity plus yourself, right? And he wrote a letter to a friend, and I think it was fairly cryptic, but he had said, like, I need to keep this a secret or else I'll be killed. But I mean, John Dee was a very involved man with the church, you know, and but things were different back then. Like, he was also a court astrologer. He was a spy. It's just like things are different. They shift. And this is why I'm kind of a believer in the aeons. And I think that we're entering a new aeon where we need to be pursuing the esoteric studies. I think that we will continue down a path of fanaticism that will be destructive if we don't, at the minimum, make some of these perspectives a little bit more known. And this is kind of an issue that I have with, like, sometimes the secrecy, right? And, like, there's a reason for it. As I said, you know, there was a time where you'd get killed for it, and even still, like, I have dealt with people who have been antagonistic to my beliefs, right? Even though I would say it's like what is wrong with it, right? Like, I believe in pursuing the greater good of mankind with, you know, through spiritual and religious belief. Like, I'm wanting to kind of attain that, like, work, that, like, great work or whatever, right? That brings up another thing. So a lot of people, they look at certain esoteric groups and they talk about their, like, desire to, like, rebuild the temple, right? Um like, or and they assume that they're, like, Zionists. So yeah, and this is within different groups. A lot of people, they mainly point the finger at Freemasonry, right? But most people in the current day, so, like, if you look at the progression of these types of studies in America, so Freemasonry specifically, but also just esoteric studies in general, had a huge impact on the foundation of America. It's obvious. It's so obvious. And I don't believe it was a bad thing. I think that it has become that within certain powerful circles, people go towards the bad side of esoteric studies. And that definitely is a thing. You know, when you kind of learn to interact with these forces and believe in them, of course, there's going to be a side of it that goes dark. But you know, it's complicated, right? A lot of people would say that kind of the founding fathers of America were evil or they owned slaves, etc. But I'm kind of the belief that there was, at the minimum, an attempt to make a new new kind of age of an egalitarian society. I mean, we can point at, you know, early racism, sexism, etc. in America's kind of foundation. But overall, if you compare it to the countries at the time, it actually was a pretty good attempt. I change my views on these types of things a lot, so don't come at me. Like, but let's run with that for a second. So a lot of people, they look at them and they say, oh, they're Protestant Christian. It's not true. The founding fathers and a lot of these people who were within that space mostly were deists. So they believed that there was some sort of divine order created by something, but that it doesn't necessarily interfere with this world actively. So that immediately puts you into a more allegorical perspective around scripture. So progressing on with America, right? And how esoteric studies developed even more here, because the majority of it was in Western Europe. I mean, at least obviously Western esotericism, I feel like, is the most commonly studied. But where was I going with this? Oh my gosh, dude. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Dang. Okay, I was gonna drop some crazy knowledge. But okay, back to kind of the progression of these studies in America. I'm talking about the aeon, okay? So what I kind of think is that we're in this position right now where sorry, okay, yeah. So I was talking about kind of like Zionism within the esoteric studies, etc. Okay, so I want to address that. The majority of people who I've met who are kind of in the esoteric studies realm, they look at this concept of building the temple internally, or they building the temple as strictly internal. The building the temple allegory has existed in ancient Egypt. I believe it was in the kind of Hellenistic era, you know, with the Greeks. I could be wrong, but there's been very many different, both initiatic orders and also just religious groups who had this allegory of building the temple within, right? So what has happened, right? It's such a mess now. Like, we have, through fanaticism and literalist interpretation, fundamentalism, we have now, between the Abrahamic faith, so much conflict. And it sucks because you go on Instagram and you see like you'll see a Christian person in the comments like shitting on Judaism, and it's like, I'm guilty. Like, they'll be like, this is like so Jewish, da 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 da. And like, I'm kind of guilty of like going in the comments and being like, bro, your religion is extremely downstream of Judaism. And again, don't come at me, but it's like, the Abrahamic faiths are very, very similar. They just have slightly different interpretations, right? Can you believe in continued existences of prophets, right? Okay, so Islam's more compatible with that, right? Or like the Latter-day Saints Church or something like that, right? Within Christianity, there's so much division, right? Oh, do you believe in papal infallibility? Do you not? What's your view of apostolic succession? There's so much infighting. And this is what I like about kind of the esoteric studies, is that it kind of gets away from that because it's so fringe that while there will be disagreement and debate, right, there's kind of this overall pursuit of just like, we want to attain some sort of knowledge that can better us, or even like better society, whatever, like better ourselves though. I find that it's less combative, but an example of a potential disagreement is the psychological model versus literal model debate. So this is kind of a big thing in like modern pagan groups, which I don't really consider myself to be a part of. Like, I know about it. But are the gods, the polytheistic deities, are they literal, or are they a psychological archetype, or kind of are they both? So the problem with the psychological model, if you believe that they're strictly archetypal, is that you're missing out on the kind of like leap of faith. You're missing out on like a true belief in something that is like beyond you. You could believe in the emanationist structure where there is divine forms, and then kind of these are lesser on the totem pole, kind of, and like they are the face that we're meant to kind of worship and work with. Dude, sorry, the flies and bees are like going crazy. Oh bro, come on, get away. That's you can go that kind of more psychological route. It's a little bit more like Jungian, I think, and it kind of works in a more secular, modern kind of world. Or, you could be a literalist and believe that you could truly connect with these divinities beyond, just the archetypal way. And so like there's kind of some like fighting around those topics, right? That's one example, right? There's so many different things, right? There's so many different debates. But what I would say is that because it's more niche, there has to be more unity. And part of why I actually kind of support a little bit more guardedness within esoteric studies and groups is because you can't really just like let everybody into your discussion. Like, there's the public kind of discussion, right? The public discussion of it. But the way I see it is that like let's say you tried to found a church. Like, let's say you tried to found a church on this. It would just be constant debate and attempts to explain like kind of complicated topics that like require some prior knowledge. Like, it really is the type of thing where people have to kind of seek it out and then come to it. But I think that overall there should be at least some sort of an attempt to get people to at least be kind of open-minded towards alternative perceptions of these types of things. And, I mean, this has been a thing at points, right? Like Rudolf Steiner, Theosophy, Helena Blavatsky had kind of attempted this. They wanted it to be more open, out in the open, which I'm in support of. I liked Steiner's kind of view of that. And I would recommend people to read Steiner if you're kind of wanting a fun leap into something different. I mean, we're talking Christ is still the redeeming figure towards the divine structure while also being archetypal for transformation. Your soul reincarnating to do the great work, even kind of under this more Christian formula. It's cool stuff. Like, if you want to just throw yourself into something that like can, give you a new perspective, I mean, fuck it, right? But again, I think we're part of this kind of new aeon where we're going to need new frameworks. And the traditionalists are going to hate me for that, right? And saying that, like, while there is a perennial truth, it's going to have to shift with the times, okay? That's very deconstructionist and progressive of me, okay? But, I'm joking, okay? Because like I'm kind of, I still believe we need to point ourselves towards like higher transcendental principles, and I think that we need metaphysics and stuff. So I'm not really like a true deconstructionist, but I think that as the times do change, so do the faiths. And a lot of people wouldn't like me to say this, but I think that's a big part of what Christianity was, especially in its foundation. It was the new concept of the loving God, the sacrificial God, the God that interfaces with mankind in a loving way. This was a new aeon. It was the getting away from the prior, more fear-based, behavioral way of being into a more internal, people again are going to disagree with me on this. I'm sorry, dude, but more internal intent being kind of the root of good / sin, etc. So okay, so where do you go from here, right? If you're a person who has a faith that you currently believe in, start there. Look at some slightly alternative perspectives, right? Look at kind of some of the esoteric sides of your belief set. If you don't like it and it doesn't work for you, then you can ditch it. If you're a person who's currently working for being an atheist, get something that's a little bit more historical or kind of like pantheistic, maybe deistic. I'd say start with some Manly P. Hall shit. It's kind of just fun. Like, it's very fascinating how he wrote that book too. Like, he was so young and so fascinated with those topics at such a young age. But yeah, start there maybe. Get it, like, I gotta say this. Get open to the fact that the esoteric understandings of things, there's even esoteric interpretations of them. Like, I hear people say, oh my gosh, that like all esotericists basically fall into some form of Gnosticism, right? Oh, that they all are trying to kind of like cover up the fact that it's really the demiurge that owns this realm and that the Nephilim have come to Earth and all this stuff, right? There is so many types of esoteric thought. Like, just ditch anything where somebody is dogmatically saying that any sort of ritualistic order, initiatic order is rigid in one belief set or another. Seriously, like, ditch that view. Like, we are entering a new esoteric revival, I believe, and I want to be a part of that for people. I truly do. Like, if I can pull people towards something that will benefit them truly, where they're not going to be doing dark shit, and they can find their belief in good somehow, right? And it's going to be through this type of thing, then that's fucking awesome. So, yeah, these bees are going crazy, and I got to go in a second, but I just want to talk about this. Get into it a little bit. If it's not your thing, if you can't, then that's fine. But just know that your God does not need to be in a box. Okay, I'll say that. And it's not just God. It is whatever it is. Like divinity does not need to be placed in a box. To get a little Kierkegaardian on everybody, it's like how can you bridge to the divine or the illogical through rationality? Like, there's a Kierkegaard quote that's like that. I'm gonna have to paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of, you cannot reach the kind of leap of faith. You can't take a leap of faith to something that is unseen through the logic that is seen. And some people would disagree with that. I guess like Thomas Aquinas type kind of systematizers, but I would 100% disagree with those people. I think that there's no proofs, that there's no space for proofs of God, that rationalizing it is kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways. I think he was a smart guy, and I think it was kind of necessary for the time. It was kind of the beginning of Enlightenment thought within Christianity. But again, that's some aeon stuff, okay? Like that needed to happen. That was Christianity getting a little bit more into a certain zone, right? And so yeah. So I kind of look at it all as like the flow of causality, but we are entering a new era where we got to get on the esoteric swag. So, but be healthy with it. Go slow. If you're a person who's got kind of some mental health issues, don't skits yourself out. That can happen. So Yeah, and I mean, if you end up getting into this in a way where you want to connect with other people on it, figure out a way to do that. Try to find groups near you potentially, or just like through the internet. Stay away from too many weirdos, but like, see what you could do. Just overall, right? I want this to be a positive thing for people and myself. So, yeah, go out there, develop some sort of belief in something beyond you that can benefit yourself and others. Have fun with it. Have it be something that is life affirming. This is my opinion, right? I push back a bit on standard Gnosticism and Buddhism because it's life denying, in my opinion. I um, I don't believe I believe that while this realm is heavily flawed, that there's a purpose in it. My view is that mankind is the bridge between the material and the divine, and that we are intended to be here for that. I think that it is a necessary piece of divine order. I So it's a little bit of a greater good type of stance, right? And people who deal with the problem of evil will come at me for that and say, "Oh, well, if we're that bridge, why do we need so much flaw?" And I would kind of say, like, I don't know, but I hope that there's some sort of redeeming factor. A lot of this is hope. Like, there's a quote in a book it's written by the guy who wrote Thinking in Destiny. It's like a chapter from it. I forget what he says, but I think it was written on Freemasonry. And he says that Masonry hopes and wonders it doesn't claim to know. And he's talking about like the true roots of Freemasonry, not like, corrupted cultural Freemasonry that a lot of people perceive. He's talking about the core roots of kind of like the initiatic stuff it was built on top of, right? So that's what I want to say. Like, your beliefs should aid in you hoping and wondering and leaping towards some sort of a belief, not claiming to know. So I want to leave you guys with that. This ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to be. So yeah, hopefully this can benefit somebody. And I mean, yeah, fuck it. We're entering the new Aeon, so hop on it, bro. Also, yeah. I gotta say one more thing. There's kind of what I'm seeing, bro, is this revival. I'm seeing the esoteric revival. People are getting into it, but it's niche, terminally online people a lot of times within Gen Z. And we need to make it real life, kind of. There needs to be a real life side of it. What I'm seeing in the opposite direction is kind of the trad cath orthodox wave. And the reason that is reviving so strong, and the reason I'm not against people getting involved in that, even though it's not my belief set, is that they want in-person community, they want beauty, and they want some sort of belief in something transcendent, and then they want tradition. It fills all of those things, right? They can get community, they can get a belief in something beyond. It's beautiful. I mean, I love more esoteric art, right? But I also think that kind of the churches maintain some of their power and pull towards people through worldly beauty. And then the cope is that it's divinely inspired, right? Okay, like, I get it. But without a doubt, I think that if the church aesthetics were not there, I think a lot of people wouldn't even fuck with it. But okay, moving on. I think we're going to see this more. We're going to see people go towards the traditional faiths that are more literal. They want the people. They want to be involved, okay? And then we're going to see more people getting into the esoteric studies. And I think we're going to see a decrease in secular society, or at the minimum a split. And I think that this can be good. I think we need a revival. So, yeah. All right, I'm going to get going, but peace out and stay healthy. And yeah,